Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/MaliciousCompliance, where people follow exact orders to spite someone. And in today's episode, it's all about horrible business owners getting taught lessons. And OP tells the story about the time a smug Karen owner uses the phrase, "Everyone's replaceable," to intimidate her employees, and it backfires so hard. Guys, I hope you enjoy the stories. Don't shake your heads too hard. And as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. I was recently reminded of something that happened a few years ago. I used to be a dispatcher for a plumbing, HVAC, and basement waterproofing company, but I was more of a coordinator. I handled customer bookings, scheduling, some parts ordering, dispatching, etc. As I used to say, I have more hats than a hat rack. Now, my techs had their own tools, and I did my work on the computer. I kept bugging my boss for a better computer, but the guy never got me one, saying it wasn't needed. So I built a system at my own expense and brought it into the office. My techs had personal tools, so this was mine. As a matter of fact, 10 years later, it's the system I'm typing on now. When I gave my notice, my boss, the owner, and I agreed on 3 weeks' notice as an exit strategy. Unknown to me, the owner was convinced I was bluffing and was just hunting for a raise from him, so he played this stupid game in his mind. The guy refused to hire a replacement, convinced I would stay in the end. My boss was more of a field supervisor, and the owner handled the office and admin. Well, finally, the day before my last day at 2 p.m., I was introduced to the new hire, and I was told to train him. I just thought to myself, you intend to have me train a guy for a complicated role in a few hours? I was on a 44-hour schedule, 10 hours Monday to Thursday, and Friday I was off at 11 a.m. My last day there, I said my goodbyes, and at 11 a.m. I began dismantling my computer. The first thing I did was format the hard drive, as I told them I was going to do. Fortunately for them, the data was all backed up on the server, except for what had transpired that morning, despite my repeated warnings to trigger a backup into the server at 11 a.m. The owner came out in a bit of a panic attack when he saw me taking apart the computer, as he had forgotten it was me that owned it, and now his dispatch station had no computer. He asked if I could leave the computer behind, and I declined. He then set my replacement up on an unused antique computer in a cubicle. It had an effing CRT monitor, and it was slow as molasses. The job was hard enough with 4 screens. I can't imagine doing it with 1. This guy wasn't a dummy, but there was no way I could have trained him in a few hours. He had the bare bones of the process, and that was it. By noon, I was out the door. My boss spent the remainder of the day and most of the next week in the field, leaving the owner to deal with the fallout, and it was legendary. Nobody could handle it. The replacement quit. He never showed up on Tuesday, and nobody else in the office could do what I was doing. The owner was flustered. He dumped a lot of work into accounting, which pissed them off with the extra workload, and he tried to handle scheduling and dispatching himself, pissing off a lot of the techs. The guy also stuck one of the CSRs into training for the role, and she wasn't the brightest bulb in the chandelier. The best part is, I used to handle the after hours on call, and since there was nobody with enough experience, the owner had to answer his phone at all hours of the night, 7 days a week. And this is when the exodus started. Over the next few weeks, many of the good techs bailed. The jobs were screwed up. I had heard that 2 basement waterproofing jobs, each worth 5 figures, were double booked. The company hit the wall hard. And how do I know this? Well, about 3 years ago, I reached out to my boss on LinkedIn, and he had moved on to another employer. He offered me a job, and I took it. We get along amazingly, and he's told me all kinds of stories about crap that hit the fan when I left. And all they had to do was buy a new computer and give me enough time to get the new guy in the groove. See, reading a post like this, I don't know how some people manage to be the owner of a business at all. Like, not providing a computer for such an essential and complicated job, what was he thinking, right? Like, even after OP brought in their own computer to do it, the owner should have realized that the fact that they did that means they really need it. And you know what the simple solution would have been? To offer to buy OP's work computer. That, and maybe take your employees seriously when they give you a 3-week notice. Not everyone's bluffing for a pay raise. I started working for a small business when I was 20 years old. Fast forward 5 years and I'm practically running the place with just the GM and the assistant manager above me. That's when the GM leaves, so the assistant manager takes over naturally. I waited 5 weeks for the owner to promote me to assistant manager, but that never came. Yet my list of responsibilities grew and grew. We never hired anyone to take on my role, and we never tried to hire anyone to replace another coworker who had left a few months prior. We were so badly understaffed that it got to the point where if I didn't show up to work, the only person that could open the business was the owner himself. Now that wasn't standard, as he's been semi-retired for 20 years. The guy only comes in to check on things and pay bills, like 5 hours a week at his desk. With that said, I was currently making $12 an hour. 5 weeks after the GM left, I told the boss I wanted $15 an hour. It's not unreasonable, considering the general manager was making $20 an hour and the assistant manager was making $18 an hour, both with full health insurance benefits. Me, I wasn't receiving health insurance through the business at the time. Anyways, it took my boss 5 weeks to get back to me. The guy kept ducking me. If you're keeping track, it's now been 10 weeks since the GM left and I still don't have a raise. When we finally have our sit down, he offers me $14 an hour, but promises to give me a raise to $15 in a year. I then explain that $15 an hour was more than fair, considering I don't need to be on the health insurance plan. That's when he said the business was doing badly and that's all he could afford, so take it or leave it. And for the record, the business was doing poorly compared to the previous year, but $75,000 or so had just cleared up on his payroll. So cry me an effing river. That's when I told him Walmart's hiring cashiers for $13 an hour, Target for $14 an hour, and another local supermarket chain for $14 an hour. I flat out said, why would I want to keep managing a business for $14 an hour when I can stock shelves at the grocery store for $14 an hour? The owner kept his cool for the most part, but he was visibly upset. He then said to me, look, we just don't pay that much here. If you want to make that much, then go work for those people. And hearing him say that, malicious compliance it is. I'm thinking to myself, okay, you got it. The next day, I give him an extremely generous notice. I needed to save a bit more, and I didn't want to leave my coworkers hanging. I also wanted to see if he would budge, but the guy didn't. During this time, I expected to train new employees. That never happened. He never hired anyone. Fast forward a few weeks after my departure, the boss himself has to work part-time to make up for my hours. He's now clocking in 20 hours a week, after going 20 years without working a 9 to 5. My coworkers tell me he's miserable and wishes I still work there. And the thing is, I kind of feel bad because at the end of the day, he was a nice enough person, but I'm not gonna let myself get taken advantage of. Anyway, they called me just a few days ago, and they wanted to know if I wanted to work the holidays, our busy season. I explained I have 5 years of experience in this field, and I left as an acting assistant manager. So if you want to hire me seasonally, you're gonna have to pay me $17.50 an hour. The manager told me they couldn't afford that much. I then said, if you want to hire a high school kid for minimum wage during the busy season, then go for it. Have fun training them. If you want to hire somebody with years of experience that's already trained, you'll have to pay me $17.50 an hour. He never got back to me. I'm currently making $18 an hour at another small business. Maybe you shouldn't tell a valuable employee to find another job when they ask for a raise. Their loss. Guys, I will honestly never get tired of these kinds of stories. Stories where crappy bosses refuse to pay their best employees what they're worth, and they have to suffer for it in the end. In my opinion, that $1 more an hour that would have gotten OP to stay would have been well worth it. But instead, I guess the owner wanted to go back to work or something. And this person comments, so many companies are like that abusive ex who was sure you couldn't find anything better. And then you do. And then they're utterly shocked. So here's a bit of backstory. I worked as a relatively young, new manager of a small business. There were about 4 managers who all reported to the owner. We had about 20 staff members, and I was regularly in charge of 5 to 6 staff members at a time. Now for the malicious compliance. My shift was due to run for 9 hours on this day, and the employee handbook stated that this shift required a 1-hour lunch break. There is also a specific subsection where it stipulates if you're required to remain on call during your lunch break, then you would be paid for the entire hour. When I approached the owner about this, I was told that I could just eat some sandwiches in the staff room, which was a cramped, dark storage room, and just go help out if anyone needed me. I argued that this would mean that I was on call, and therefore I should be paid for the break. The guy was having none of it, and he claimed if I needed to dip out to buy some lunch, then of course that would be fine, as I wasn't on call. And here's where the malicious compliance comes in. If I'm not on call during my break, then I sure as hell wasn't gonna hang out in a dark storage closet for an hour. So I made sure that on the day of the malicious compliance, I had some of my senior staff members working with me. I then explained that I needed to leave the store for an hour for lunch break, and I picked a nice quiet day and made sure the staff had my personal cell phone number just in case something went wrong. I was only 5 minutes down the road, and I made sure that I could be there if something urgent came up. But for this to work, I had to be off camera and away from the center for the full half hour. I then proceeded to head down to the local lunch bar and read the paper, and just enjoyed the peace and quiet for exactly the amount of time I had for my break. I ran my watch timer as I left the store to ensure complete compliance of the 1 hour break. It took 3 shifts for the owner to realize I was doing this, and when he found out, all hell broke loose. I was told something along the lines of, what if something happened? The junior staff don't have the experience to deal with major situations. What if someone held us up at gunpoint while you're away? Every situation he brought up highlighted the fact that I needed to be there at all times, to which I calmly responded I was on break. And then I repeated his claim that I wasn't on call, and I could leave the store to get lunch if I wanted to. That's when he realizes what's happening, and he asked me not to do it again until he had a chat with the relevant people. The next week, he had a meeting with me, explaining that it was wrong for him to ask me to stay in the center on call without pay, and from now on, all managers will be paid for their breaks. It's been 4 years now, and the managers have come and gone, but all of them have since been paid for their breaks. I feel like I made a positive change for the employees, and I'm proud I made the effort to show them that we needed to be on call. Thanks for reading my story. You know, it's always nice to hear when someone's malicious compliance makes everything better for others in the end. And finally, a person in charge that realizes when they're in the wrong and they fix things for the better. I don't think that happens very often, but I love this malicious compliance so much, guys. And I also love the fact that OP was such a good person for not putting other people at risk while they were conducting their malicious compliance. Wonderfully done. So this happened a few years ago. When I was 16 years old, I got my first job working for a franchise-owned pizza place. I worked there until I was 24 years old. When I was 19, I received the shift leader position, and I got a 30-cent raise. Our store was pretty slow, and only had a handful of employees there, so I understood. One day, the franchise owner comes in to tell me I'd be getting a new manager. The franchise owner gave me his personal cell phone number and said if I need anything, to call him if the new manager had any problems. So the next day, I'm working my 10 a.m. to midnight shift and the new manager comes in. We'll call him Stan. We talk a little more and he asked why there's no assistant manager. I let him know that we probably don't make enough money to pay an assistant manager. He said he would worry about that and then left. I jumped to the conclusion that he was going to make me the assistant, but I was wrong. I closed that night and had to come in at 4 p.m. the next day. When I did, Stan was there with a girl that I've never seen before, wearing one of our uniforms. He then said it was his roommate, Wendy. She had never worked for a pizza place before, but she just lost her job. So he announced he hired her as the assistant manager and completely changed my schedule and severely cut my hours. Oh, and guess who had to train her? I did. Before Stan and Wendy, I worked a 10 a.m. to midnight shift 4 days a week, and then 4 to close on 2 other days. Now, I just had 4 p.m. to midnight 5 days a week, no more overtime. That severely hurt me financially, but I sucked it up. This place was pretty much in my backyard, and I loved the job before all this mess. The next couple of weeks are okay, except we're coming up short every night I close. Usually no more than $10, but that's a lot. and this was coming back on me because I'm the one who does the nightly inventory, the paperwork, and the deposits. Of course, I brought the shortage problem to Stan, and he told me if it kept happening, he would start taking it from my check. Now, I had never stolen a penny from this place, and I felt pretty attacked. He says he wasn't accusing me, just letting me know what he would have to do. So I say, fine. Every day from now on, when I close, I want to do a shift change. A shift change is basically counting down the drawers, which would help figure out where the shortages are coming from. He agrees. The very next day, I go in at 4, and I start clocking in and all that fun stuff before Wendy leaves. I look at the order screen for the day, and I see how well we did for lunch, money-wise, and that's when I notice something. It said at 12 o'clock, a customer who just happened to be one of my regulars called and ordered 10 pizzas for pickup. It then said the order was canceled. Now, they had never canceled before, so I was concerned. And here's a quick side note. I feel like I was being more of a manager than both of mine put together. So I decide to pick up the phone and call the customer from earlier. I didn't ask why he canceled. I asked how his experience was today since we had a new manager. He said it was fine, except she needs to learn how to work the credit card machine. Apparently she told him she could only take cash. He then said he left, went to the ATM, and came back and paid $80 in cash for the pizzas. He said that other than that, everything was fine. I asked to confirm, and he said he most definitely did not cancel. So here's one possibility. The credit card machine did go down, and she could only accept cash, so she canceled the order in the computer until he came back and paid, and she just forgot to ring it through. This would be harmless. However, I instead think she's stealing. I knew if I went to Stan, he wouldn't do anything about it, so I call our franchise owner, Eric. I asked his opinion, and he says he thinks I'm right, so he tells me what to do. First, I wasn't allowed to say a word about it to Stan or Wendy. He said let Wendy leave and finish out the day as usual. He said if she's not stealing, you'll come up $80 over at the end of the night. If she is stealing, we should break even. I finished counting, and we were $1 short. Side note again, if this is hard to follow, I'm so sorry. So the next day is when the magic happens. I go in at 4 as usual. Wendy's there waiting for Stan to pick her up, and that's when Eric walks in. He tells her to follow him to the office, and he tells me to send Stan back when he gets here. Stan comes in and asks why Eric is there. I just shrug and tell him he's wanted in the office. Maybe 20 minutes later, Stan walks out and he brushes past me and gets into his car. Wendy comes out next and she tells me she hopes I'm happy. Eric hadn't come out of the office yet, so I went back there to talk to him. He told me in 3 weeks that they stole over $1,000 between them, and he never would have known if it wasn't for me. He then says, "Oh, now you're the new assistant manager. I'm gonna give you $13 an hour and we'll consider more in a few months." $13 an hour. I was making $8.50 before this. I stayed a few more years after this and then left to do the mom thing. I actually miss it sometimes. Wendy and Stan Facebook stalked me for a few months after. It was pretty hilarious. If you read all that, you're a trooper. Thank you. So about 2 years ago, I was working as an assistant manager at a small business, about 20 to 25 employees overall. I'd been there for 5.5 years, 3 as an entry-level position. And then as the business grew, the manager was getting overwhelmed, so they create the assistant manager position and put me in it. Now, I was their jack of all trades, covering multiple positions in the business when needed. I built and maintained a new website, served as the entire IT department, did inventory management, distributor relationships, and much, much more. Well, I have no idea what happened, but owner number 1 was fed up with owner number 2's BS. Owner number 1 was the responsible one that knew what was going on, while owner number 2 was just along for the ride. So owner 1 said, either sell me your half or buy my half. Well, as luck would have it, owner 2 ends up choosing to stay. A few staff left, including the manager, as we knew what sort of business this would become under owner 2's management. The rest of us braced for the disaster that was coming, while we decided what to do. Onto the malicious compliance. So as the assistant manager, the staff had brought some concerns about quality and staff safety to me, so I brought them to the owner. And the response I got was, "I don't care about staff concerns. You guys are all replaceable anyways." I was also told to tell the staff that they should no longer bring their concerns to me, but to the new manager who had been freshly hired. Well, I went home that night and shared the entire conversation with most of the staff, and I typed up my 2 weeks notice and I turned it in the next morning. And here's the fallout. So in addition to losing me and everything I normally did, another 4 people quit the next month, leaving the owner with about a 50% reduction in staff. And just to give you an idea of how bad the place ran, even at full staffing, we were barely managing. The website's not been touched since I left. It still has the old owner and the other outdated information up. I've also gotten multiple questions about where something was or how to do something because no one else knows how to run certain things. A number of their clients I know have left because things have been getting worse and worse. And overall, in my opinion, she has to sell or close because I can't imagine it's going well. Oh boy, leave it to the owner who knows absolutely nothing to take over and ruin the place. Like, I'm sure in her mind, she bought out her partner thinking she'd be swimming in cash now. But when you don't know how things work and you've just been there for the ride and collecting a payday, this is what happens. I'm honestly really surprised why owner 2 didn't take the payout. And here is another thing. A lot of owners really need to pay attention to their staff and recognize the key players, the people they can't afford to lose. Maybe she should have taken her staff concerns seriously and not just thrown out the old, "You're all replaceable." Guys, let me know what you think. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of r/malicious compliance. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed yesterday's episode on the channel, it's an r/I don't work here lady, where a smug CEO demands OP make him a coffee, and it only gets worse from there. The guy gets so embarrassed. Guys, go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.